Behold, with your abundant favor, us your servants, whom you have called to the performance of important trust in these islands. Father, let your blessing descend upon us here assembled, and grant that we may treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote your honor and glory, and to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of these islands and of those whose interest you have committed to our charge. And this we beg in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen. Please be seated. Item number 2, confirmation of minutes. Senator Tawana Tanek, call on you.
Good morning, Madam President.
Good morning.
I move that the minutes of the meeting of Wednesday, the 15th of July, 2026 be taken as read.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection.
Madam President, I move that the minutes of Wednesday, the 15th of July, 2026 be confirmed.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection. The minutes are confirmed. Thank you, Senator Tawana Tanek. Item number 3, messages, Mrs. Beal.
There are no messages, Madam President.
Thank you, Mrs. Beal. Item number 4, reports of committee. There are none. Item number 5, announcement. Senators, we have one announcement, and that is in the name of Senator Lindsey K. Simmons, the Junior Minister of Home Affairs. Senator Simmons, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I hereby present for the information of Senate the Electricity Integrated Resource Planning Process Suspension and Reconstitution Order 2026, being by the Minister responsible for energy and exercise of the power conferred by Section 13A and 45B of the Electricity Act 2016. Senators may access copies on their tablet and or the Parliament website. Thank you, Madam President.
And thank you, Senator Lindsey Simmons. Item number 6, notices of motions. There are none. Item number 7, petitions. There are none. Item number 8, statements. We have one statement this morning, and that is in the name of the Honorable Minister Ryan Robinson, Parent Chief, JP, the Minister of National Security. Minister Robinson, Parent Chief, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and good morning.
Good morning.
Madam President, it has now been a little more than 2 weeks since I assumed responsibility for the Ministry of National Security. During that time, I have met with the ministry's senior leadership and received briefings on the work of its departments, units, and operational teams. These discussions have provided me with an initial understanding of the ministry's responsibilities, the progress of its current work, and the matters requiring immediate attention. They are also helping me determine its short-term priorities and strategic direction beyond the specific ministerial and legislative matters assigned to me. While 2 weeks is a relatively short period, one point is already clear. A central responsibility of the ministry is to ensure that the different elements of Bermuda's public safety system work together. This means facilitating coordination across policing, border protection, emergency response, national defense, disaster preparedness, cybersecurity, violence reduction, and substance use prevention and treatment, while strengthening collaboration across government, the private sector, and the community. Madam President, the ministry's departments and operational teams continue their day-to-day work to keep Bermuda safe while strengthening policing and border security, emergency and disaster response, maritime security, substance use services, and the supporting technology and infrastructure. At the ministry level, work is progressing on disaster preparedness, cybersecurity, legislative reform, and the security and defense review. I will provide more detailed updates as these areas progress. Today, however, I wish to focus on the matters requiring my immediate attention. Madam President, in assigning me responsibility for the Ministry of National Security, the Honorable Premier identified cannabis reform and the implementation of automated speed enforcement as immediate legislative priorities. During my initial briefings, I also reviewed the work undertaken towards an adolescent substance use treatment program and identified its advancement as a further immediate ministerial priority. These are priorities for focused ministerial attention and, where required, legislative advancement. They do not replace or diminish the ministry's everyday responsibility to protect the public and support the operational work of its departments and teams. My intention is to advance each matter with clear timelines and defined outcomes, with initial implementation targeted for the fourth quarter of 2026. Madam President, I will begin with the Adolescent Substance Use Treatment Program. The program will provide structured treatment and support designed around the clinical, developmental, and social needs of adolescents. It will also connect with the government's wider prevention and early intervention work, recognizing that substance misuse can overlap with family instability, disengagement from education, exposure to violence, and offending behavior. Following my initial briefing, I met with the Department for National Drug Control to discuss and brainstorm the proposed approach. That discussion identified opportunities to refine the program so that it delivers the greatest possible benefit for young people and their families. My focus is on refining the work already underway and establishing a clear pathway towards commencement and implementation. I will provide a further update as this work progresses. Madam President, the second immediate priority is automated traffic enforcement. I have been reviewing the work undertaken to date, including the completion and optimization of the island-wide CCTV network and its license plate recognition cameras. However, speed cameras cannot be treated as a standalone intervention or a box-ticking exercise. They are not by themselves a cure for dangerous driving. The program must support the wider objectives of changing driving behavior, improving road safety, and reducing serious injuries and loss of life. The ministry will therefore work with the ministry responsible for transport, the Bermuda Police Service, the Transport Control Department, the courts, and other agencies to integrate the program into Bermuda's wider road safety arrangements. It must also be supported by appropriate legislation, reliable evidence management processes, safeguards for privacy and data, and clear arrangements for processing tickets or summonses. Implementation will be phased across the legislative, procurement, infrastructure, and operational work streams, with initial implementation targeted for the fourth quarter of 2026. Our objective is to deliver a program that produces a meaningful public safety benefit. Madam President, the third priority is cannabis reform. The ministry is reviewing Bermuda's cannabis-related guidance, regulations, and oversight arrangements to balance the limitations of the United Kingdom framework with the government's commitment to safe and responsible use within an appropriately regulated system. Policy development in this area is wide-ranging. When the public hears of any developments around cannabis, they may get excited about the prospect of a fuller conversation on recreational cannabis or the potential for a regulated legalization framework. There are strong views and factions on full cannabis reform, and I want to provide clarity about the government's established commitment at this time. Madam President, this clarity is particularly important for me to note because I aim to be transparent with the general public, my peers, and colleagues to maintain a high, accountable standard with people of Bermuda. With that, Madam President, government's current commitment is to review and update cannabis-related guidance, regulations, and oversight to strike a balance between the limitations of the United Kingdom framework and safe, responsible adult use. The public should be aware that the current commitment does not match public discourse, which may mean that expectations are misaligned. Madam President, allow me to clarify the record, and it is my preference for the Senate and the public to hear the difference and direction of cannabis reform as it currently stands directly from me. There are three parts to cannabis reform. The immediate focus is on the first two components of this work. Firstly, hemp and hemp-derived products, and two, medical cannabis. The proposed hemp amendments will clarify the legal treatment of hemp and consumer products currently being sold without a sufficiently clear compliance framework. The medical cannabis framework will permit appropriate access while ensuring the appropriate safeguards patients and the wider community deserve. Drafting instructions have been issued to the Attorney General's chambers. The ministry will work with Parliamentary Council and the relevant technical authorities to resolve the remaining matters and advance the legislation. Initial implementation of the hemp and medical cannabis reforms is targeted for the fourth quarter of 2026. The third part, which captures public attention and discourse, is a broader regulated regime for adult use. Now, Madam President, as I described, at the risk of sounding repetitive, for clarity and transparency, this one will take longer. Let me tell you, Madam President and the public, the reason why. Any proposed approach must be carefully considered in light of Bermuda's constitutional relationship with the United Kingdom and the need for effective regulation, oversight, and appropriate safeguards. It requires bringing in various perspectives and coordination across our community, touching on national security, health, medicines regulation, customs, and law enforcement, so that whatever we ultimately land on has lasting support. I am erring on the side of transparency so that expectations are managed. So when it comes to cannabis reform, 2 of the 3 parts are anticipated for initial implementation this year. The third, I want us to get right together, and that will be undertaken in due course with the appropriate information, confidence, and stakeholder engagement. Madam President, beyond these immediate priorities, violence reduction and community safety will be my principal ministry-wide policy priorities over the coming months. During my initial briefings, I reviewed the National Violence Reduction Strategy and the current work and structure of the Violence Reduction Team, formerly the Gang Violence Reduction Team. That review confirmed that the team provides an important operational foundation through school-based prevention, community outreach, case management, family support, court advocacy, crisis response, and workforce development opportunities. The next phase of work will therefore focus on refining the strategy and aligning the team's structure and operations with the resulting priorities. This will provide a clearer framework for work across prevention, intervention, enforcement, youth justice, community engagement, and rehabilitation. It will also help ensure that efforts across government and the community are coordinated, responsive to identified needs, and directed towards shared outcomes. This will require sustained collaboration with the police, schools, community organizations, families, and individuals with lived experience. Madam President, while these priorities require my immediate attention, important work continues across the ministry's wider portfolio. The Disaster Risk Reduction and Mitigation Team is developing Bermuda's National Risk Register, consolidating information from across government and partner agencies to identify the hazards and threats facing Bermuda. New disaster management legislation will support this work by modernizing the emergency management framework, clarifying responsibilities, and strengthening coordinated action. Cybersecurity also remains essential to national resilience. I acknowledge the recent tabling of the Joint Select Committee's report on the 2023 cyber attack. The ministry will carefully consider the recommendations relevant to its remit as we reinforce Bermuda's cybersecurity framework. To fully implement the Cybersecurity Act 2024, the ministry is developing regulations and guidance, establishing the Cybersecurity Advisory Board, and progressing the National Cybersecurity Unit. We are also conducting a national cybersecurity risk assessment and developing national cyber incident response capabilities. This work is being undertaken across government and with critical infrastructure operators and private sector partners to improve Bermuda's ability to prevent, withstand, and recover from serious cyber incidents. Madam President, none of this work can be achieved without the people who deliver it. Recruitment and retention remain challenging, and we are exploring new recruitment methods, improving access to training and professional development, and creating clearer pathways into public safety careers. Our objective is to attract capable people, equip them to perform effectively, and support their development throughout their careers. Madam President, my first 2 weeks as minister have reinforced both the breadth of the ministry's responsibilities and the importance of approaching public safety as a shared endeavor. There is much to do, but I have identified a strong foundation on which to build. I wish to thank the Permanent Secretary, the Commissioner of Police, the Chief Fire Officer, the Commanding Officer of the Royal Bermuda Regiment, the Collector of Customs, the Director of the Department for National Drug Control, the Ministry's unit and team leads, and the officers and staff across the ministry for their commitment, professionalism, and candid engagement during my initial briefings. I also thank our colleagues across government and the community partners whose work is essential to delivering Bermuda's public safety objectives. My immediate focus will be on advancing the 3 identified ministerial and legislative priorities while giving sustained attention to violence reduction and community safety as my principal ministry-wide policy priority. Beyond any individual project, my central responsibility as minister is clear: to ensure that the ministry remains focused on protecting the public and that its work produces tangible results for the people of Bermuda. I look forward to providing senators and the public with further updates following the summer recess and the commencement of the new legislative session. Thank you, Madam President.
And thank you, Minister Ryan Robinson, Parent Chief, for your statement. Moving on with our orders of business. Item number 9, introduction of bills. There are none. Item number 10, the first reading of public bills. The following public bills have been received from the Honorable House of Assembly and are read for the first time. Their titles are Justice and Community Safety Reform Act 2026, Corporate Income Tax Amendment Act 2026, Tax Credits Amendment Act 2026, Human Rights Amendment Act 2026, the Cost of Living Commission Amendment Act Number 2, 2026, the Bermuda Health Council Miscellaneous Amendment Act 2026, and the Health Insurance Amendment Act 2026. And Senators, all bills will be taken up during our orders of the day later in the meeting. However, I would just like to point out that we have changed the order in which they will be presented, and I will you need to be advised that the Bermuda Health Council Miscellaneous Amendment Act will be first, the Health Insurance Amendment Act will be second, and the rest will follow. Justice and Community third, Corporate Income Tax fourth, and the Tax Credit Amendment Acts will be 5. The Human Rights Amendment Act will be the 6th one, and the Cost of Living will be the 7th one. So that will be the order in which we will take them up on the orders of the day. Moving on with our agenda then, the first reading of private bills, there are none. Item number 12, question and question periods. We will now undertake the questions which were presented for oral response today. I will call on now the Honorable Minister Parent Chief to provide the oral responses to a parliamentary question from Senator Victoria Cunningham, and I would ask Senator Cunningham to read her question at this time.
Good morning, Madam President, and colleagues in the chamber and the listening audience. This was for oral response from Senator the Honourable Ryan Robinson, Parent Chief, Junior or Spokesperson for Finance. Can the Spokesperson for Finance please confirm the current level of government's consolidated cash balances as at June 30th, 2026, and how this compares to the balance as at 1st of January 2026?
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to the honorable member for the question. The consolidated fund cash balance as at 30th of June 2026 was $61.2 million, compared with a 2nd of January 2026 balance of $26.6 million. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Cunningham?
Thank you, Madam President. I have a follow-up question to that.
Yes. First.
Can the junior minister confirm whether government has drawn any overdraft facility, line of credit or short-term borrowing to manage cash flows this year?
Madam President, I will need to revert with an answer to that, if that's okay with the honorable member, if I could get back to her on that one.
Mm-hmm. Senator Cunningham? Do you have a second question?
No, that would be it.
That would be it. Would any other senator care to ask questions on this statement? No. On this parliament? No, oh God have mercy. Listen, I'm really losing myself here.
Move on, and then if he comes back,
Okay, Senators, while we're waiting for a response, we'll move on then to the next set of questions, and that is also from Senator Victoria Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam President. And this is directed to the Junior Minister for Home Affairs, Senator Lindsay Simmons. To provide oral response, can the Junior Minister please confirm in what respects the National Electricity Sector Policy, the NESP, has been incorporated into the IRP planning process?
Thank you, Madam President. Bermuda's current integrated resource plan dates from 2019. Section 40 of the Electricity Act 2016 requires a regulatory authority to request a new plan proposal at least every 5 years. The new IRP was finalized on the 3rd of July 2026 in advance of the release of the government's updated National Electricity Sector Policy. The development and direction of the policy were known to all parties in the sector and to the public. The minister issued a ministerial directive to the regulatory authority in April 2025 signaling the new policy direction. The consultative draft policy was published on the 20th of April 2026. Public consultation closed on the 21st of May 2026, and the minister updated the legislator on the 15th of May 2026. The Electricity Act 2016 establishes the structure process through which government policies enter integrated resource planning. Section 44 permits the regulation authority to approve a plan only where it considers the plan the best approach to meeting the proposal of the Act and complying with the ministerial direction. The Electricity Amendment Act 2026 strengthens this framework. It makes consumer affordability an integral part of the IRP and enables the planning process to be reconstructed to ensure consistency between government policy and the plan. The finalized National Electricity Sector Policy following the current IRP pause will therefore be incorporated into the IRP through the statutory route. Government will publish the finalized policy once it reviews the consultation responses incomplete and experts the planning process to give the policy full effect. The ministry will keep the legislation informed as the work advances. And
Senator Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to the Junior Minister for that response. As a supplementary question to that, the response mentioned consultation, and I was just wondering, I'm assuming public and private consultation, I'm just wondering which stakeholders were consulted specifically in that consultation.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question one more time?
The Junior Minister mentioned consultation, and I was just wondering which specific stakeholders were consulted in that, the IRP planning process with the National Electricity Sector Policy.
It was with the RA and all the RA and all the regulated entities. Thank you. And also, can you repeat the question for the Minister of National Security?
For the Minister of National Security, the question was, has the government drawn down on any overdraft facility, line of credit or short-term borrowing to manage cash flow this year?
Thank you. And you got my answer correct? Thank you.
Would any other senator care to ask questions on this? Why am I doing that? I know. I believe you have a second question. Senator Cunningham, you have the floor.
Yes, my second question to the junior minister is, can the junior minister please confirm what assessment government and the regulatory authority made of the additional electricity demand expected from the reopening of the Southampton Princess in August this year?
Thank you. Forecasting the impact of individual developments, including the reopening of Southampton Princess, falls within Balco's operational responsibilities as a transmission, distribution, and retail licensee. Balco is responsible for assessing expected changes in electricity demand and for planning a system to meet that demand. The regulatory authority reviews the information and analyzes submitted by Balco through the regulatory process established under the Electricity Act and associated license obligations. Expected demand also anchors the integrated resource planning process. Section 40 of the Electricity Act 2016 requires that the resource plan to state the expected demand for the planning period and how the licensee will meet it. Government expects the additional demand from the reopening of Southampton Princess to be reflected in that planning. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Cunningham.
And I get that it's Belco's responsibility, but has Belco indicated that it can meet the additional demand without impact to other customers or its reliability? And a follow-up to that one, if I may.
Yes, I answered the question. Balco will cover it. In my answer, I covered that.
Okay, a follow-up question to that, supplement to that. What engagement has taken place between government, the regulatory authority, and the hotel's developers on power requirements?
It is Foley. It looks like him.
Madam President, that's not a supplemental to the question that was given to me.
Senator Cunningham, your second sup was not.
Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Before I move in, I'd just like to acknowledge and recognize former Senator Foley in the gallery. Welcome to you, sir. Moving on then with our questions for oral responses, we have Senator Tariq J.D. Smith, who will be presenting oral questions to the Honorable Orion Parent, Minister Parent Chief.
Thank you, Madam
What's your
President.
question?
Yes, thank you, Madam President, and good morning to my Senate colleagues and listening audience. I will say this, the Minister in his brief absolutely answered any question as far as his three priorities. I want to thank the Minister for that brief earlier. And yeah, I just, one supplemental to the question would be that with the change in the Minister, has any of the policy directions changed from previous initiatives? That would be all I have on that one. Thank you in advance, Minister. Thank you, Madam President.
Did you hear the question?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. I would refer the honorable member to my statement. I thank him for his question, but I'm just prepared to speak to what was in the statement regarding any potential refinements to what the work that is currently ongoing.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Senator Tawana Tanek, you have a supplementary.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. I do have a supplemental to Senator Minister Parent Chief's response to Senator Smith with regard to the speed cameras, which were mentioned in the statement. What stage are we at? Are the speed cameras fully operational? And how many speed cameras are there? And where are they? Thank you.
Madam President, that wasn't the question that was previously. We already finished that question period for that part, that section.
No, so this,
We haven't done questions on the statement yet, so she can ask that question
Yeah.
when we get to that.
Senator Tannock, your question can be when we get to the statement. All right? We're finishing right now. We're dealing with the questions that have been presented for response this morning. So we're now down here at this one.
The second set.
Yeah, down here, okay. We're now moving on then to the Senator Tarek Smith, your questions to Senator Misha Fubler.
Thanks again, Madam
I'd like
President.
to read your question, your first question.
Sorry, my apologies for cutting you off, Madam President. Thank you, Madam President. This is for the Junior Minister, Senator Misha Fubler. Can the Junior Minister please confirm whether the government has procured a new or replacement search and rescue tug or vessel for marine imports, and if so, where is it intended to be positioned? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. I guess the new may be relative, right? I don't think we had any parameters around that, but in direct response to your question, no, we have not procured a new or replacement search and rescue tug vessel.
I have a second question. Can the Junior Minister please confirm the age and expected service life of the vessel transport management system currently in use, and whether it will be reached, it has reached its end of operation or warranty of life?
Thank you, Madam President. I thank my colleague for the question. The current VTMS does not have an end of life, as it is comprised of specialist software that operates on off-the-shelf computer servers. So, in short, the vendor is providing regular updates. It would not have an end of life as in historical systems that may have been purpose-built to run on proprietary hardware.
No further questions? That completes those questions that were presented for oral response. We'll now entertain questions on the statement that was delivered by the Honorable Ryan Robinson, Parent Chief, this morning on national security. Senator Tawana Tannock, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Yes, thank you, Senator Minister Parent Chief, for your statement. So my question is regarding the speed cameras, and what stage of implementation are we at? Are the cameras installed? How many cameras are there? And in which parishes are they located? And my second question is regarding cameras, and those will be the CCTV footage cameras. And also, how many CCTV footage cameras are currently up and running and operational? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to the honorable member for her question. In relation to the question on speed cameras have not yet been installed, and therefore they are not operational. We are at the testing phase and are looking to run a test or pilot of the program later this year. So we're in the implementation phase. There are currently 28 proposed enforcement locations, but I would add that that number could increase or decrease based on operational needs.
Senator Vice President John White.
Thank you, Madam President. So this is a question I asked probably about 9 months ago here. I was concerned about the lack of time in adopting these cameras, and the reason that was given to me at the time was because of PIPA concerns. That was what we were told in the Senate was the cause of delay. And the expectation we were told was that it was going to be adopted in the first quarter of 2026. Well, obviously we're far beyond that. So I'm just wondering, whether it's testing or PIPA, this just seems to be going on forever. I'm just wondering why for something that is so important to the community to prevent serious road traffic accidents, why it is taking so long for this to be put into place. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator John White. Minister?
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to the honorable member for the question. Just to clarify, I think, just to avoid any confusion, there are two separate but related projects. You have CCTV cameras, and then you have the automated traffic enforcement program, which is the speed cameras. So I'm not certain as to what the honorable member was advised regarding the delays around speed cameras. That project is progressing quite well in terms of planning and implementation, but I can certainly follow up and check whether the concern mentioned in regards to Piper is one related to CCTV or speed cameras. What I can say in terms of the current stage of the speed cameras, it is progressing quite well. There are a number of workflows or work streams in relation to that program. There's legislative change that is needed. There's the operational side in terms of identifying, for example, the correct infrastructure, what type of pole the camera will be placed on, the locations, and how they might affect the neighboring areas. There's the actual technical equipment. These cameras are different from CCTV cameras per se because they have to capture speed, etc. They also have to recognize license plates. So there are various projects underneath this speed camera automated enforcement initiative. And I would say the project is on track for Q4 testing and implementation, at least early implementation. I hope that addresses the honorable member's question. I also want to add, because I note that the honorable member, Senator Tannock, asked a question around CCTV cameras specifically. We have currently 234 operational cameras providing 458 views across 148 locations. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Minister. Right. Senator Tawana, sorry. Cunningham, I thought you were putting your hand up, sir.
Thank you,
Senator Cunningham, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to the Honourable Minister for his statement. And I will start by wishing him well on his endeavours. Sounds like he's going to have a fairly busy summer. I want to focus in on the adolescent substance abuse treatment, which I think is greatly needed. And just firstly, can he confirm the age range of the adolescent, the projected, I guess, targeted age range of this program? Because I think, you know, this sounds like it's going to be an substance abuse treatment program. You know, I'm more kind of worried about getting to it at the crux before it starts rather than treating, you know, trying to cure what's happened. So just wondering how that will likely look. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President.
Yes,
If the honorable
Minister.
member would bear with me one moment just to confirm that.
Yes,
Give me just a
yes,
minute.
certainly.
Thanks.
Would any other senator care to ask questions on the statement? Yes, well, you can have it. Yes, certainly. You may. It's your supplement.
Madam President, I thank the honorable member for her question and her well wishes. In relation to the adolescent substance abuse treatment program, the age range anticipated is ages 14 to 19-year-olds. But I do note the point around prevention, and that is the general work of the National Drug Control Department. They have a variety of programs and initiatives focused on prevention in addition to treatment. And so this program is intended to focus on treatment for substance abuse, and that program is being refined. But it is not the only work that department does. Thank you. I will also add that if there are young people in need of treatment, they will be assessed and, if necessary, included in the program.
Thank you, Madam President. And a supplementary to that, and kind of bringing in then your cannabis reform, is if we're saying 14 to 19, I believe Bermuda's laws are 18 for alcohol and 16 for cigarettes. could be 18, I'm not entirely sure. But considering we're looking at a treatment program from 14 to 19, have there been studies on the percentage or numbers of our adolescents who have drug abuse issues, and do they drop below the age of 14?
Madam President, I'm not sure if the honorable member is asking for the specific data at this time. I'm sure there certainly have been studies. I know we have the Drug Information Network, and the Department of National Drug Control undertakes this type of work and review regularly. So I can't speak to the specific data, but we definitely know that there are young people, unfortunately, that will be engaging in substance abuse below that age. Hence, with the work of this adolescent treatment program, if there are persons below that age, they will be assessed, and if necessary, they'll be included. But in terms of the age range spoken to, that's sort of the target age range for the program once implemented.
Do I still have a supplementary on that? Yes. So my supplementary on that is, if we want to get a baseline to see whether any program is working, on this side of the chamber, we do like our results and outcomes. So I'm just making sure that when anything is put forward, that those outcomes that show the tangible results are actually clarified for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll just say that studies are regularly done by the NDC, and that will have informed the creation of the program.
Madam President, if I might just supplement Minister Parent-Chief's response in that regard. He referenced the burden data. It is publicly available. It's published data. You can go to the Department of National Drug Control's website. There is a school study which gives detail on the age of first use. And what I would say is that is in the remit of the Department of National Drug Control. Some of the programming is carried out through partner agencies and through the third sector. So you'll now see MIRA's running the Promoting Alternative Thinking program, which is really aimed at prevention for school-age children. There is ELSPELS, which is a linked prevention education program for children beyond younger than the age of 5, so that would be a preschool program. And then Life Skills is operating at the middle and high school levels. These programs generally run across both public and private schools.
Thank you, Madam AG, for your response. If there are no further questions on that statement, sorry, I didn't see your hand, so Senator David Rogers, you have the floor.
Quick question. Have there been any projections made on the potential, the volume increase of cannabis after the reforms have been made regarding medical cannabis? Because I'm assuming it would be an increase in availability of cannabis on island. Have there been any sort of estimates made?
Just for clarity, Madam President, is the honorable member asking, have there been any projections in terms of, if we're talking about medical cannabis prescriptions from, for example, pharmacies or physicians?
That would be interesting data to have as well. The projected prescriptions, yeah, that would be interesting to know. I was actually talking more substance itself, but that is also a good metric to understand.
Thank you. If you could just allow me one moment.
Yes, Minister.
Thank you, Madam President, and to the honorable member for the question. In relation to medical cannabis, it's far too early to speculate around the numbers of prescriptions. We are still in the research phase, and so it would be premature to offer any guesstimate.
Thank you. Thank you, Senators, for your questions on that statement, and thank you, Minister Robinson-Parenti, for your responses. Senators, we will now move on to the next item on our agenda, and that is the public bills that were implemented this morning. As indicated, we will start with item number 1, the second reading of the Bermuda Health Council Miscellaneous Amendment number 2026, year 2026, and that's in the name of Senator Lauren Bell, the Junior Minister for Health. Senator Bell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning to the listening audience and my Senate colleagues. I move that the provisions of Standing Order 25 be granted so the Senate may now proceed with the second reading of the bill entitled Bermuda Health Council Miscellaneous Amendments Act 2026.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the bill entitled Bermuda Health Council Miscellaneous Amendments Act 2026 be now read a second time.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today to introduce the Bermuda Health Council Miscellaneous Amendments Act 2026. This bill seeks to remove the duplication in the regulation of health service providers, businesses, and high-risk health technology that resulted following the enactment of the Bermuda Health Council Amendment Number 2 Act 2024. Madam President, for background, the 2024 Amendment Act was introduced in response to long-standing concerns regarding the operation of health service providers without an appropriate regulatory framework, together with inadequate oversight and maintenance requirements for high-risk health technology. Prior to the enactment of the 2024 Amendment Act, the regulation of the health service providers was fragmented across several pieces of legislation. Pharmacies were regulated under the Pharmacy and Poisons Act 1979, while hospitals, clinical laboratories, and diagnostic imaging facilities were regulated under the Public Health Act 1949. Similarly, the regulation of high-risk health technology was primarily limited to equipment falling within the scope of the Radiation Act 1972. While these acts establish important regulatory controls within their respective areas, they did not provide a comprehensive or consistent framework for regulating health service providers and high-risk health technology. This resulted in gaps in regulatory oversight, limitations in enforcement, and inconsistencies between legislative intent and operational practice. Madam President, the 2024 Amendment Act addressed these shortcomings by establishing a modern regulatory framework for health service providers and high-risk health technology founded on the principles of safety, quality, and sustainability in the delivery of health services. However, while the 2024 Amendment Act introduced this new framework, it did not include all the consequential amendments necessary to align existing legislation where regulatory responsibilities overlapped. Madam President, the 2026 Amendment Act addresses those outstanding consequential amendments by removing the unnecessary duplication, clarifying the application of the legislative framework to health service providers, and ensuring that owners and operators of health service providers and high-risk health technology are subject to an efficient and coherent regulatory regime. The proposed amendments will improve legislative clarity, support effective regulation, and reduce unnecessary administrative burden while maintaining a robust oversight in the interest of public health and patient safety. Thank you, Madam President.
And thank you, Senator Lauren Bell, Junior Minister of Health. Would any senator care to speak on this bill? Yes, Senator David Rogers, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam President. And thank you so much to the senator for bringing this to the floor. I have some comments. They may turn into a question. This is actually really good. The changes to the pharmacy regulation, clinical labs, hospitals, diagnostic imaging, radiation. This stuff has been outstanding for a number of years. So it's really wonderful to see consistency, conciseness being put into the act. I don't see any changes to how insurers are regulated by the council, so I think that's kind of a missed opportunity in the cleanup. Additionally, there are a number of statutory bodies that the Health Council has administrative function for, and they really should have all of them. So that would have been a good addition to the bill. But it does bring the word of the legislation in line with what the Health Council has been doing. So that's fantastic. I'm assuming this is a cleanup for universal health care. So I'm expecting to see some regulation on health providers and health professionals to come before October. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we move on, I'd just like to acknowledge the presence of the Honorable Craig Cannonier, the opposition whip in the gallery. Welcome to you, sir. Would any other senator care to speak on this bill? Senator Tawana Tannock, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. I would just like to echo Senator Rogers and say that I, as a member of the Bermuda Medical Council and who sees firsthand a lot of the issues that come before the Medical Council that oftentimes are supposed to be before the Health Council and people are unsure where to go, I also too welcome this change and this amendment and commend the government for doing so. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice President John White, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Yeah, just to echo comments made by Senator Tannock, I'm fully supportive of these changes. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. So, Senator Lauren Bell, it appears you have full support.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for my Senate colleagues for their support. Madam President, I move that the bill entitled the Bermuda Health Council Miscellaneous Amendments Act 2026 be now read a second time.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection.
Madam President, I move that the Rule 26 be suspended in respect of this bill.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection.
Madam President, I move that the bill entitled the Bermuda Health Council Miscellaneous Amendments Act 2026 be now read a third time.
Is there any objection to the third reading? No objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the bill do now pass.
Is there any objection to the passage of the bill? No objection. The bill is passed. Thank you, Senator Lauren Bell, and thank you all senators. We'll now move on to the next item, and that was the second reading of the Health Insurance Amendment Act 2026, and that is also in the name of Senator Lauren F. Bell, the Junior Minister for Health. Senator Bell, you can move your second bill.
Thank you, Madam President.
Senator.
Madam President, I move that the provision of Standing Order 25 be granted so the Senate may now proceed with the second reading of the bill entitled Health Insurance Amendment Act 2026.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the bill entitled Health Insurance Amendment Act 2026 be now read a second time.
Is there any objection to the second reading? No objection.
Thank you, Madam President. End-stage renal disease has a profound impact on a person's health, quality of life, and ability to participate fully in our community. Because of local health insurance finances, the majority of care in Bermuda, the level of coverage available to an individual largely determines what renal replacement therapy they're able to access. Madam President, the Mutual Reinsurance Fund currently mandates coverage for 3 renal replacement therapies. They include peritoneal dialysis, hemodialysis, and kidney transplantation. Peritoneal dialysis and hemodialysis are available on Ireland and fully covered by the MRF. Kidney transplantation, however, must be performed overseas, and the MRF benefit is presently capped at $150,000 towards the total cost. Madam President, the peritoneal dialysis costs approximately $112,000 per year, or about $1.1 million over a 10-year period, and is clinically appropriate for only a limited number of patients. Hemodialysis, which is the most commonly used therapy, costs approximately $135,000 annually, or $1.4 million over 10 years. Madam President, by comparison, kidney transplantation cost approximately $387,000, inclusive of surgery and associated care. With an average graft survival of 10 years, this equates to an annualized cost of a roughly $38,700 and represents a savings of more than $1 million per patient over a 10-year period when compared with the long-term hemodialysis. For suitable candidates, transplantation is both the clinical preferred option and as well as the most cost-effective therapy over the long run. Madam President, despite these clear advantages, the current mandated benefit of $150,000, combined with the supplemental insurance coverage that typically provides only an additional $50,000 to $100,000, leaves many patients facing substantial out-of-pocket costs. These costs create a significant barrier to transplantation and results in continued reliance on dialysis therapies that are fully insured but considerably more expensive. Madam President, there are presently 91 patients who are clinically eligible for transplant assessment. Many have indicated that anticipated out-of-pocket expenses are a major factor influencing their willingness or their ability to proceed. Increasing the legislated level of coverage would remove this barrier and improve access to the most clinically appropriate treatment, enhancing quality of life and reduce long-term costs to the health system. Madam President, claims data show that the average cost of transplantation is approximately $387,000. However, actual cost may vary depending on case management needs, patient health status, hospital market conditions, and international location of transplant center, and whether the donor is living or deceased. The proposed amendments therefore include the flexibility to adjust the prescribed coverage amount through subordinate legislation, ensuring that coverage remains aligned with real-world costs without requiring further amendments to the Act. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Bell. Would any senator care to speak on this bill? Senator David Rogers, you have the floor.
Once again, thank you, Madam President, and thank you to the senator. So lightning has struck twice. It must be the colors you're wearing, because this is a fantastic bill as well. So you will have the support of the opposition in this bill. We have known that transplant has been the key intervention for years. When the initial when the initial funds were granted out of MRF, we really expected a larger pickup in transplantation. We did not foresee the unintended barriers that would be placed in people's way. And so it was a journey to get the allocation increase. So I applaud the government for recognizing the difficulty that people have faced. This bill increases the maximum. It gives the minister some flexibility in adjusting the cap through consultation and negative resolution, which I really appreciate, because it is not just granting powers. The check and balance is nice. My main concern with the bill, however, is that not every transplant goes well. So if the transplant doesn't go well, there is a potential for an overspend. So the question is, what additional resources are given to patient selection, clinical outcome management, and the post-transplant care to sort of safeguard the mutual reinsurance fund, because with this increase in benefit, you will have an increase in transplantations and an increase in risk.
Would any other senator care to speak? Vice President John White, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to thank the Junior Minister for bringing this bill to the floor, and for the reasons that she has given, I'm in full support of it. So thank you.
Thank you. Senator Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam President. And again, I will echo the comments of my colleague. I guess my question is around the 400,000. If we're saying, I think it was mentioned in your remarks that 387,000 is kind of the average. 387 to 400,000 does not seem like a very big amount of leeway. And I just think, I would assume we're talking a handful of cases per year for kidney transplants, but I just wonder the additional work that might have to go through getting the different consultations and whether or not that 400,000 was deemed appropriate, or whether it may end up being increased in the future as we see increasing medical costs everywhere.
Senator Tawana-Tannock, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. And I thank the Junior Minister for bringing this much-needed amendment. However, one thing I will point out is that I don't think perhaps it may go far enough, because we also have in 2G of that same section that the cap per day for persons undergoing treatment, actually, is it per day or per month? The cap per month for persons undergoing treatment is $12,532. Now, if that was set at the same time that the $150,000 was set, then I would assume that that was based on what the cost would be per month at that time. Does the Junior Minister know, for this amount of $12,532 per month, what the monthly cost is at this current time, and if that amount remains sufficient? And if not, why wasn't that also amended? Thank you.
Senator Rogers.
While we wait for the answer to the questions, I would just like to commend the kidney transplant team. They're literally the unsung heroes in this health sector for that sector. So they're doing fantastic work.
Madam AG, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I did want to, given the broad support on the other side of the aisle, commend certainly our Minister of Health, but commend the spirit of collaboration in another place last Friday, which permitted this bill to come and be read, all three readings in one sitting. We are grateful. And there is a question of, whether this bill could have waited to be taken up in September. And the answer was that absolutely not. I think there was reference to perhaps not many people are kind of in a queue. Our understanding is that there are a number of people in a queue. There are a number of people in Bermuda with acute health issues and on a wait list. So this, and while I hear comments questioning whether 400 is not enough, we've moved from 150,000 to 400,000. So it's an incredible move at a single time, recognizing the needs in our community that must be met. So I do want to say that we are grateful, the government on this side, for the collaboration of the OBA in agreeing and recognizing the urgency of getting this bill passed today in the Senate. Thank you, Madam President.
And thank you, Madam AG, Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Madam President. I also would like to echo the my colleague's sentiment in expression of appreciation for both the independent and the opposition senators in their expression of support for this bill. It's very much appreciated. Just to provide some clarity to the questions that was posed by the opposition, Senator Rogers. For clarity, any other expenses will be covered under the MRF. So the $400 cost is for the transplant only. Okay, so any other all other associated post-transplant care will be covered under the MRF. There was a question by Senator Cunningham about whether we were anticipating a need to increase this amount in the future. Just for her understanding, the dialysis rates are set by the Health Council and is paid from the MRF. So if it is so ordered that there needs to be an increase, then we'll go by that guidance. And Madam President, can I just ask for Senator Tannock to repeat her question, please?
Senator Tannock.
Yes, thank you, Senator Bell. I've actually just restarted my computer, but my question was with regard to, I believe it's section 2G. So that would come right under the $150,000 amount. And it says that the amount per month, the cap per month for a patient undergoing kidney transplant treatment is $12,532. So my question was, if that amount cap was set at the same time that we capped the 150,000, is that still the current amount for a patient undergoing kidney transplant? And if it's not, what is the current amount? And if it's more, why wasn't that amount also increased?
Thank you. Just give me a minute to get the support from our technical team. Thank you.
Madam President, if I may,
Madam AG,
it's
yes, absolutely.
another indulgence. While my colleague is waiting for answers to that question, I want to go back to the orders of the day with a request for yet another shift. I am waiting as a result of some collaboration with the opposition early this morning for the wording on a floor amendment to the Justice and Community Safety Reform Act. We're looking at it. And I recognize with the broad agreement of on the health matters, I think the Justice and Community Safety Reform Bill would have been third. So can I ask that we move that to sixth? It will give us time to get the floor amendment prepared. And so just if the listening public have this order paper, then we would be going.
So we'll go to number the fourth,
So-
second reading of the corporate income tax? Is that-
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Senators, are you following?
Thank you. Much obliged.
Thank you.
Madam President, I have received a response from my technical team in response to Senator Tannock's question. So what she was referring to was the kidney dialysis treatment, which is different than what this amendment is about, where our specific changes related to the transplant. So we want to be encouraging transplants to better quality of life. So the anticipation will be that those dialysis patients will be moving to be doing transplants.
Senator Tannock.
Yes, so thank you, Junior Minister Bell. I am aware of the difference between the two, and I was actually asking why one was changed and not the other. But if I understand it, your response is that because you're capping the dialysis at $12,000, $12,523 or $12,532 a month, and not increasing it, because the thought is that dialysis patients will now move into kidney transplant. So you don't need to increase the amount allocated for dialysis. Is that it?
Right, those patients who are receiving dialysis care now, their costs are covered under that part of the act. And no, we were not looking to increase it. Okay, thank you. Madam President, I believe that is the last of the questions. I've managed to answer all the questions for my colleagues. And again, I want to thank them for their support for this. And to that end, Madam President, I move that the bill entitled Health Insurance Amendment Act 2026 be now read a second time.
Is there any objection to that motion? Second reading? No objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the Rule 26 be suspended in respect to this bill.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the bill entitled Health Insurance Amendment Act 2026 be now read a third time.
Is there any objection to the third reading? No objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the bill do now pass.
It has been moved that the bill do now pass. Is there any objection to the passage of the bill? The bill is passed. There's no objection. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Madam President.
Junior Minister of Health, and thank you all senators. We will now move on to the second reading of the Corporate Income Tax Amendment Act, and that's in the name of Senator the Honorable Ryan Parent, Chief Spokesperson of Finance.
Thank you, Madam President.
You have the floor.
Thank you. Prior to doing that, if you might indulge me, Madam President,
Absolutely.
the Honorable Member, Senator Cunningham, asked a supplementary question
Ooh.
in relation to the oral response regarding the Consolidated Fund.
Mhm.
If I may answer that question, as I've received a response from the finance team.
Yes, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, Madam President. The question was whether the government has drawn down on any overdraft facility, line of credit, or short-term borrowing to manage cash flow this year. The answer to that question is no.
Thank you for that response.
Thank you, Madam President. If I may now move on to the Corporate Income Tax Amendment.
Yes,
Yeah,
indeed,
okay.
you can.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the provisions of Standing Order 25 be granted so that the Senate may now proceed with the second reading of the bill entitled Corporate Income Tax Amendment Act 2026.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection, Minister. You can continue.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the bill entitled Corporate Income Tax Amendment Act 2026 be now read a second time.
Is there any objection to the second reading? No objection.
Thank you, Madam President. It is my distinct honor and privilege on behalf of the government to rise this morning in this honorable House to debate the bill entitled Corporate Income Tax Amendment Act 2026. Madam President, this bill proposes amendments to the Corporate Income Tax Act 2023 to provide miscellaneous updates to enhance Bermuda's corporate income tax regime and to better facilitate the filing of tax returns, and proposes to make consequential amendments to the Corporate Income Tax Agency Act 2024. Madam President, by way of background, the Corporate Income Tax Act has been in force since December 2023, with most of the act operational from January 2025, and Bermuda has now entered the full operative phase of the corporate income tax. As the regime has moved forward, several components have required refinement to ensure the framework remains aligned with international standards, reflects practical implementation needs, and provides clarity for both taxpayers and administrators. Madam President, the Corporate Income Tax Agency continued with its standard practice of public consultation on proposed amendments to the CIT Act, accompanied by the publication of an illustrative bill. We have taken the time to review all the valuable feedback received to support the development of robust and practical legislation as we continue to evolve our framework. Madam President, these proposed amendments relate to providing for the better administration of the corporate income tax regime and to better facilitate the filing of tax returns. The government finds that there's a need to ensure that the administration of the corporate income tax is founded upon clear legal principles. Therefore, the purposes of these amendments are to clarify and refine the existing provisions to ensure that the Corporate Income Tax Agency is given the administrative and operational mechanisms to effectively oversee and administer the corporate income tax regime. Madam President, further to these changes, consequential amendments are proposed to the Corporate Income Tax Agency Act 2024. To ensure the legislation remains aligned with the updated corporate income tax framework, the consequential amendment clarifies the enforcement regime to be applied to the Corporate Income Tax Agency. Madam President, in closing, I wish to emphasize that the government remains confident that Bermuda's corporate tax framework upholds Bermuda's strong commitment to global compliance and transparency while maintaining the island's respected reputation internationally. The progress achieved thus far has been made possible through the invaluable contributions of the International Tax Group, whose expertise and dedication continue to play a central role in advancing this important initiative. I would like to sincerely thank everyone in the Ministry of Finance and the Corporate Income Tax Agency, along with our dedicated advisors, for the time, effort, and expertise they've contributed to this work. I also extend my appreciation to the drafting team at the Attorney General's Chambers for their valuable support throughout this process. Thank you, Madam President.
And thank you, Senator Ryan, Parent Chief Spokesperson for Finance. And before I open the floor to the senators to respond to, I would just like to acknowledge and welcome in this chamber the technical advisor from the Ministry of Finance, and that is Mrs. Genesis Iris. Welcome to you. Would any senator care to speak on this bill? Senator Cunningham, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to the Minister for providing the brief. I also want to thank the Ministry and CETA. I believe they offered the opposition the opportunity for a brief in advance of this bill, so that was much appreciated. But I think how we see it is exactly how you said it, various miscellaneous updates. More kind of housekeeping in nature. But having spent 22 years in international business, I think I can say that regulatory clarity that we get and the confidence in that is what strengthens our jurisdiction. So, people ultimately know what they're signing up for. We don't see many major changes. I think it's just refining the administration of what we would see to be a still quite young regime, and continues. So I think this kind of clarity is exactly what we need in the collaboration, so we support this bill.
Thank you, Senator Cunningham. Would any other senator care to speak on this bill? Senator John White, Vice President, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. As this is just routine administrative in nature, it has my full support. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Vice President John White. Senator Tawana Tanak, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. I don't have any objection to this bill. However, and I know that we've stated this in the Senate previously, there have been so many amendments to this bill and to the one that will be coming next that we have requested that there be some type of guidance to the business community who are impacted that allows them to track the amendments. And if that has not been produced, and I haven't seen one in my form in my company or as Deputy Chairperson of ABIC, if there has not been one produced, I would urge the Minister or Senator representing Finance to please issue guidance tracking all of the changes and what they mean, and if there is no substantive change, then to indicate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tanak.
Thank you, Madam President.
Yes, Minister.
I appreciate the comments by my honorable members, Senator Cunningham and White, and regarding Senator Tanak's comments, the concern and the recommendation is noted and will be communicated to the finance team for their consideration. Madam President, I now move that the bill entitled the That's what I was moving on. Yeah, Madam President, I move that the bill entitled the Corporate Income Tax Amendment Act 2026 be now read a second time.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that Rule 26 be suspended in respect of this bill.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the bill entitled the Corporate Income Tax Amendment Act 2026 be now read a third time.
Is there any objection to the third reading? No objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the bill do now pass.
It has been moved that the bill entitled Corporate Income Tax Amendment Act do now pass. Is there any objection to that motion? No objection. The bill is passed. Thank you. Senator the Honorable Ryan Parent, Chief Spokesperson for Finance. We'll now move on to the next item on our agenda, and that is the second reading of the Tax Credits Amendment Act 2026, and that is also in the name of Senator Ryan Parent, Chief, the Spokesperson for Finance.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the provisions of Standing Order 25 be granted so that the Senate may now proceed with the second reading of the bill entitled Tax Credits Amendment Act 2026.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the bill entitled Tax Credits Amendment Act 2026 be now read a second time.
Is there any objection to the second reading? No objection. Carry on, Minister.
Thank you, Madam President. It is my distinct honor and privilege on behalf of the government to rise this morning in this honorable House to debate the bill entitled Tax Credits Amendment Act 2026. Madam President, this bill proposes amendments to the Tax Credits Act 2025 to provide for the better administration of Bermuda's tax credits regime and to better facilitate the filing of tax credit claims. The government finds that there is a need to ensure that administration of the tax credits regime operates within well-defined rules, criteria, and transparency. Madam President, by way of background, the Tax Credits Act has been enforced since December 2025 with effect from 1st of January 2025. The Tax Credits Act establishes several qualified tax credits. 1, a substance-based tax credit benefit. 2, a community development tax credit benefit. And 3, a utilities infrastructure tax credit benefit. Madam President, the Tax Credits Act provides tax credits to incentivize industries that are instrumental in the growth and development of the Bermuda economy, to invest in their on-island operations, to encourage such investment that results in increased employment in Bermuda and increased job opportunities for Bermudians, to further encourage such investment where it results in increased expenditure on domestic goods and services, and thereby benefits the wider local Bermuda economy. And lastly, to recognize and encourage charitable contributions where such charitable contributions represent a meaningful contribution to the community. Madam President, the Corporate Income Tax Agency held a public consultation on the proposed amendments to this act in June 2026, which included an illustrative bill. The feedback received during the consultation process has been thoroughly reviewed and thoughtfully considered. Where appropriate, revisions have been incorporated into the legislation to address the concerns and suggestions raised by stakeholders. This approach ensures that the legislation is both practical in its application and reflective of the input from those who it will affect. Madam President, the proposed amendments relate to the following matters and that are put forward for consideration. A, to provide a more accurate calculation of the number of eligible employees in regard to the calculation of tax credit benefits awarded under the substance-based tax credit. B, to provide greater clarity in the calculation of expense-based tax credit benefits. And C, to reduce administrative complexity where there are changes in a corporate group to ensure such changes do not impact the calculation of a group's tax credit benefits. Madam President, further to these changes, consequential amendments are proposed to the Public Treasury Administration and Payments Act 1969. To ensure the legislation remains aligned with the updated tax credits framework, the consequential amendment reflects the ordering of tax credit payments from the Tax Refund Reserve Fund before the Consolidated Fund for all tax credit recipients, and not just recipients who are within the charge to corporate income tax. Madam President, in closing, I wish to emphasize that the government remains confident that Bermuda's corporate tax framework upholds Bermuda's strong commitment to global compliance and transparency while maintaining the island's respected reputation internationally. The progress achieved thus far has been made possible through the invaluable contributions of the International Tax Group, whose expertise and dedication continue to play a central role in advancing this important initiative. I would like to sincerely thank everyone in the Ministry of Finance and the Corporate Income Tax Agency, along with our dedicated advisors, for the time, effort, and expertise they've contributed to this work. I also extend my appreciation to the drafting team at the Attorney General's Chambers for their invaluable support. throughout this process. Thank you, Madam President.
And thank you, Minister Ryan Parent-Chief, the spokesperson for finance in the Senate. Would any senator care to speak on this bill? Senator Cunningham, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. And again, thank you for the delivery. The opposition supports this bill. We obviously see that these are largely technical corrections, much like the one previous. And obviously, this is a relatively new tax regime, so there's the administrative cleanups that are required, especially given the complexity, and since it's only been in force since fairly recently. I will speak, and actually, from a comment raised by my colleague, with these tax credits, obviously we're seeing difference in the payers of the corporate income tax versus the receivers of the potential credits. And I think we need to say thank you to the patience from our international business community. But I just wondered when more guidance will be provided to those companies about the qualifying employee numbers, charitable contributions, and the like. And similarly, when guidance will be given to charitable organizations as to how we're supposed to be confirming donations being made. I believe there was going to be some kind of acknowledgement required. But ultimately, I think, the overwhelming issue from our side is the transparency around those companies that are receiving some of these substantial tax credits, and whether those credits are being used consistently with policy intent, I guess. So reinvestment on the island, job creation, rather than simply flowing into shareholder returns. But ultimately, I think they've got the public confidence. It's obviously something that we've been, mandated to do. It is not a government mandate. So I think, we're supportive of anything that makes the regime more secure, more robust. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cunningham. Would any other senator care to ask questions on this? Senator Tawana Tanak, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Minister, Senator, Parent-Chief, and my comments for this bill are the same as they were for the one previously. There are so many nuances and so many different considerations for the tax credits. It would just be, again, I have not seen any update or proviso on what this would mean for the international business community, either in my position as somebody who works in IB or as Deputy Chairperson of AVIC. So my urging is that we produce some type of guidance that includes these updated amendments to say, this is what the change is, this is what it means, and this is how it may or may not impact you. Thank you.
Senator, Vice President John White, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll make this unanimous and provide my full support for this bill. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam President, and the comments and feedback by the honorable members from the Senate is noted and will be transmitted to the Ministry of Finance for their consideration. Madam President, I now move that the bill entitled Tax Credit Amendment Act 2026 be now read a second time.
Is there any objection to the second reading? No objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that Rule 26 be suspended in respect of this bill.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the bill entitled Tax Credit Amendment Act 2026 be now read a third time.
Is there any objection to the third reading? No objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the bill do now pass.
It has been moved that the bill do not pass. Is there any objection to the passage of the bill? No objection. The bill is passed. Thank you, Minister Robinson, Parent-Chief, and thank you all senators who participated.
Thank you, Madam President.
We'll now move on to the next item on our orders of the day, and that is the second reading of the, beg your pardon, the human rights, We've had a change in our order. So the next item is the second reading of the Human Rights Amendment Act 2026, and that is in the name of Senator Lindsey K. Simmons, the Junior Minister for Youth, Social Development, and Seniors. Senator Simmons, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I move that the provisions of Standing Order 25 be granted so that the Senate may now proceed with the second reading of the bill entitled Human Rights Amendment Act 2026.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I move that the bill entitled Human Rights Amendment Act 2026 be now read a second time.
Is there any objection to the second reading? No objection.
Thank you. Madam President, I am pleased to introduce in the Senate today a bill entitled the Human Rights Amendment Act 2026. I would like to start by sharing with the Senate and the listening public this meaningful quote by Barbara Streisand. How I wish we lived in a time when laws were not necessary to safeguard us from discrimination. This quote reinforces our reality and the importance of this bill. Madam President, the bill amends the Human Rights Act 1981, HRA, or the recommendations of the Human Rights Commission, HRC, to close gaps in Bermuda's anti-discrimination protections, particularly in housing and the provisions of goods, facilities, and services. It protects people who rely on government financial support from being refused housing or services on that basis, and a landlord exception that currently permits discrimination in certain residential buildings and prohibits discrimination against a person because of their association with someone who has a protected characteristic. Madam President, this bill aims to strengthen and improve the government's social protection for persons within the community by closing identified gaps in Bermuda's current human rights legislation. These proposed amendments ensure the public have further human rights protection on specific matters, and the HRC maintains international standards. Madam President, despite existing protections within the Human Rights Act 1981, HRA, against discrimination regarding accommodations and exceptions set out in Section 44A, allows landlords to discriminate in relation to letting one or two independent units in the building in which they are or their family resides. A familiar arrangement in Bermuda. It is evident from the feedback provided that members in our community are being discriminated against while residing in such accommodations and or seeking to rent these properties in Bermuda. Ultimately, this frustrates the fundamental human rights recognized in international law. The right to housing at a time when the island is facing a housing crisis. Also, it prevents the HRA aligning with human rights legislation in similar jurisdictions such as Turks and Caicos and the Cayman Islands that have not included a similar exemption. Madam President, currently under the HRA, it is unlawful to discriminate against, harass, or victimize individuals based on the following protection characteristics: race, color, place of origin, ethnic or national origins, sex, sexual orientation, family status, marital status, or domestic partnership status, disability, religion or belief, political opinions, criminal record, and in certain circumstances, and age. However, there is no protection characteristic that prohibits discrimination on the basis of a person receiving government funding, which was introduced under specific legislation such as the Financial Assistance Act 2001 and the Child Daycare Allowance Act 2008. To ensure an individual can maintain a basic standard of living. Madam President, although members of the community are protected from discrimination based on their own protected characteristics as outlined in the HRA, at present, these protection characteristics do not extend to persons who associate with them. As a result, the HRA fails to provide protection from discrimination by association. When a person is denied an employment opportunity due to political opinions of an individual that they are associated with, this is not discriminatory under the law. Or a landlord refuses to rent an apartment to an individual because their cousin has a criminal record or their business partner is from the Philippines. Both examples are not deemed discriminatory under the current law. Madam President, the HRC held several consultations with stakeholders representing various sectors of the community, such as members of the public, government units, and departments. Advisory and regulatory bodies i.e., Aging and Disability Services, Age Concern, and Disability Advisory Council. Participants had the opportunity to provide information about A, challenges they experience or experiences they were aware of other people experiencing when seeking, occupying, or purchasing housing. B, discriminatory practices against persons receiving financial assistance and child care allowance, which are financial support governed by legislation to ensure an individual can maintain a basic standard of living. And C, discrimination experienced because of a person associated with another based on, for example, the race, color, or political opinions, associations of individuals. The amendments, Madam President, are grounded in the HRC's consultation process. A stakeholders consultation, the 4th of November to the 31st of December 2022, 37 stakeholders invited, 6 provided feedback. And an island-wide public consultation of the 23rd of March to the 14th of April 2023. 44 anonymous public responses. These surfaced concentrated discriminations with no recourse under the current HRA, including landlord refusing tenants who receive financial assistance, rental advertisements labeled no financial assistance, and complaints to the HRC where sections 4A strip the complainant of any remedy under section 4.1. Madam President, we have listened to our stakeholders, and this bill is part of our response in addressing their concerns. This bill's purpose is to amend the HRA by, number 1, removing provisions in the legislation that currently allow landlords to discriminate against persons in relation to the letting of 1 or 2 independent units in the building in which they or their family resides. Number 2, introducing protections against discrimination based on an individual being in receipt of government funding, specifically financial assistance short-term relief benefit, and child care allowance. And 3, including provisions that prohibit discriminations because of a person's association with another person. Madam President, the protections available under the HRA were based on the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world in accordance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as proclaimed under the United Nations. The proposed amendments set out in the bill uphold these foundations and increase the effectiveness of the HRA. The bill expressly guarantees legal protections and introduces the HRAs to ensure persons in the community seeking housing or residing in rental accommodations are treated equally and their rights are protected from discrimination and harassment. Persons who are in receipt of financial assistance, award, and child care allowance are protected against discrimination based on being in receipt of government funding, and persons who are experiencing discrimination because they are associated with another person, their rights are protected from discrimination, harassment, victimization, and marginalization. Madam President, the HRC will exercise the authority under Section 14B of the Act to prepare and publish public guidelines on the meaning of family status and on what may be considered valid reasons relevant to the nature of the particular offense. In Section 2.2a VII to ensure vulnerable persons in landlord's family, for example, children, persons with disabilities, and seniors, where a person convicted of certain offenses seek accommodations in a unit adjacent to such a family. Madam President, the strengthening of our human rights legislation removes limitations on persons' human dignity, respect, and the right to equal treatment that is owed to all members of our community. This government supports the empowerment and protection of our people through this bill. These amendments are intended as phase 1 of a multi-stage review of the HRA to address protections needed within Bermuda's human rights legislation. Madam President, I would like for us to be reminded of the words of Malcolm X. I believe in human beings and that all human beings should be respected as such, regardless of their color. In closing, I would like to add, I believe in human beings and that human beings should be respected as such, regardless of any characteristics such as their race, place of origin, color, ethnic or national origin, sex, sexual orientation, marital or domestic partnership status, disability, family structure, religion, political opinions, or criminal record. Thank you, Madam President.
And thank you, Senator Lindsey Simmons, the Junior Minister for Youth, Social Development, and Seniors. And Senators, before I open the floor for anyone to ask questions, I would just like to acknowledge and welcome to the Chamber Permanent Secretary, Ms. Pandora Glassford, and Cleta Pitcher from the Ministry of Social Development and Seniors. Well, she's the policy analyst. Welcome to you both. Would any senator care to speak on this bill? Senator Tariq Dunbar-Smith, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. And again, good morning to my Senate colleagues and listening audience. I have a few questions. But first, I'd just like to say that the OBA has always supported Bermudians and protection of Bermudians and far from discrimination, especially when it comes to housing for years. Human rights protections are fundamental to a fair and just society. No one on this other side of the aisle disputes that at all. However, good legislation is not judged solely by intentions. It must also be judged by the impact it has in the real world. My concern with this bill centers around government's decision to remove the long-standing exemption for homeowner-occupied properties containing 2 or more family units. Many of these are not large commercial landlords with extensive property portfolios. They are ordinary Bermudians who rent apartments attached to their homes, a cottage in the backyard, a unit, a duplex to help maybe pay their mortgage, support the families that may be overseas in school or overseas period, or supplement their retirement income. These owners are not simply providing accommodation, they are sharing their property, their surroundings, and in many cases, their day-to-day living environments with tenants. That reality is very different from a large commercial landlord renting apartments in a larger complex. Madam President, at a time when Bermuda continues to face housing challenges, we should be very careful in introducing measures that may intentionally discourage small property owners from making rental units available. That is the last thing this island needs, fewer rental accommodations for the people looking for housing. While I do understand the intent behind the legislation, I believe the government must demonstrate that it has properly balanced the rights of prospective tenants with legitimate concerns of homeowners. They must also demonstrate there is evidence supporting these changes and their potential impact on housing availability has been fully considered. My first question to the Junior Minister is, can the Junior Minister explain what evidence the government relied upon to justify removing the long-standing exemption for owner-occupied 2 or more unit properties, and why it was believed this protection for small homeowners is no longer a necessity? Do you want me to do all 3 questions, Lizzie? Junior Minister? Listen, audience, please, and Madam President, forgive me, Lindsey and I have been friends for years. Senator Simmons and I have been friends for so long that sometimes I forget it's not a personal conversation. And I apologize, Junior Minister. At the time when many Bermudians are struggling to find affordable housing, what assurances can the Junior Minister give that this legislation will not drive small landlords out of the rental market and further reduce housing options? And finally, what safeguards exist for the homeowner who rejects a prospective tenant for legitimate, non-discriminatory reasons to ensure they are not accused of discrimination simply because of the unsuccessful applicant and is dissatisfied with the outcome of the interview for the apartment or home? Thank you.
Would any other senator care to ask questions? Senator Tawana Tanek, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. And spending 6 years on the Human Rights Commission, 3 as chairperson, and also being a former prosecutor and a probation officer, this Amendment Act speaks to several issues that are really core to things that I am very concerned about. And so I will say from the outset, I am in complete agreement with the amendment section 2B that says after the definition of executive officer, insert government funding means any of the following. I agree that persons should not be discriminated against because they receive any type of government funding. That is a non-starter for me, and I'm glad to see its inclusion and commend the government for doing so. However, I am extremely concerned about the amendment of section 2A in the definition of class of persons. delete subparagraph 1 to 6 and substitute paragraphs 1 to 7. What that does is that puts persons with a criminal record squarely into a protected class. So what we have now is we have protected classes: race, sex, gender, etc. And we also have a provision that persons with criminal records should not be discriminated against because they have a criminal record, and that certainly is correct and just. However, nowhere else, no other legislation puts people with criminal records as a protected class who should be shielded or who should not be persecuted because of their criminal record. They should not be subject to discrimination, but that does not mean that they are a protected class. A protected class is because of something that is an inherent trait, belief, normally something you have been born with. We have seen this extrapolated to marital status. However, criminal records nowhere else make somebody a protected person. It makes you should be free from discrimination unless it's justifiable. But to be a protected class is something completely different. And that is why our legislation was drafted the way that it was. It was drafted so that persons who have criminal records are not discriminated against unless it's justifiably reasonable. But it did not make them a protected class of persons for whom you cannot discriminate absolutely or whatsoever. And so I do not agree with that inclusion, and I think it fails to realize why it was like that in the first place. And that's because it follows the Equality Act, it follows the European Convention of Human Rights, it follows the Canadian Charter of Rights on which our act was based upon. What we are doing is unprecedented. I do not support it. My second point is, with Senator Smith's comments, I completely agree with objecting to the removal of provision 4A. And I have two grounds for objecting to that. And I am reminded of the brief listen that I had of the House on some Friday. And I heard Minister Lightbourne say that this was part of their mandate to the electorate to have affordable housing. Well, your electorate are also landlords. So where is the consideration that has been given to them? Did you poll some of your landlords? Did the OBA even ask if any landlords were polled? As a matter of fact, did the OBA even object to making criminals a protected class, criminal offenses a protected class? Because I don't recall hearing that.
Madam President,
Madam AG.
a point of order, and I think it's perhaps best to bring the point of order right now because it may save Senator Tannock a little bit of her breath. Notwithstanding the fact that Senator Tannock has served as chair and on the Human Rights Commission, I believe she's fundamentally mistaken in her assertion that these current amendments are somehow making criminal record a fundamentally protected ground. That is not what it is going to. And I am certain that Senator Tannock agrees or recalls that the insertion of Section 22A, we agree, it's not a natural fit with other protected grounds, but that was added to by the Human Rights Amendment Act 2000. So we're now 26 years on, where criminal record is listed in the Act, not as a fundamental protected ground, but so it is not absolute, which is why there is a caveat with that, where it says, except where there are valid reasons. There is a carve out. So it's not a fundamental right at all. It's not a fundamental protected class. So we just want us to be clear and not go down a road of suggesting that we're building on a fundamental protected ground when that is not what the legislation originally did. That was not the point of the 2000 Amendment Act. But we are building on the carve out with this piece of legislation today. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Madam AG.
Thank you, Madam President. I actually wasn't finished. So then my question becomes, why the need? Why the need to make or to put those persons with a criminal record into the class of persons who may not be discriminated against? Why the need to include, this is my
Madam-
question for Senator Simmons,
But-
my
but
question for
just-
Senator Simmons,
Just a point of clarification.
which I do not accept.
Again,
Thank you. Senator Simmons, my question for you is, why do we feel the need to insert members of a criminal record into section 2AA, into that class of persons? That's my first question.
Yes, Madam.
The point that I'm making is that persons with a criminal record have been in the act since 2000. It's not new.
Madam President, I do not disagree with that. However, they are not included in class of persons, which is what this amendment is doing. They are included in section 2A as persons who should not be discriminated against. But in the interpretation of the Human Rights Act, there are a class of persons that's based on race, gender, religion, I can't even remember the other two, who must not be discriminated against. That's a set class of persons. What this act will do, it's moving those with a criminal record into that class of persons. So my question to Senator Simmons is, why are we moving persons with a criminal record into that subsection of protected class of persons? That's my first question. My second question is with regard to the provision to remove 4A from the HRA, and that is, as my colleague Senator Smith mentioned, the provision that allows landlords who are renting space on their property in which they and their families inhabit to state who they would like to rent to and who they would not like to rent to, who are living also with them on their property. Senator Simmons mentioned that in two other jurisdictions that were surveyed, Turks and Caicos and Cayman, that provision does not exist. Well, Madam President, it doesn't exist because that legislation doesn't exist. Turks and Caicos nor Cayman have human rights acts that are equivalent to ours. So of course you're not going to find it in something that's not applicable. Where you can find something that is supported by our act is in the Equality Act of the UK, in the Canadian Charter, and also in the ECHR. As a matter of fact, in the UK, a private individual cannot sue another private individual on a matter of housing because they are not allowed to live in that private individual's home, which I have illustrated this, and I've written this to the minister. I believe the AG may have been copied. I can't remember, so I don't want to misspeak. But I have outlined this. This provision, this saving provision, exists. Now, in Ontario, it exists slightly differently. And as Senator Smith said, I believe it exists differently because of the different structure. So in Ontario, you can only choose not to rent to somebody if you have to share a bathroom or a kitchen with them. So that's where their bar is. But in other jurisdictions that have acts similar to ours, not ones that don't have it at all, there is a provision to save individuals' right to privacy and home life, which I would also remind the Senator and Junior Minister is enshrined in our Constitution. So while I am great favor of the non-discrimination of those persons receiving government funding, and I believe it's long overdue and wholeheartedly supported, I do not support moving those persons with criminal records into the class of persons in the interpretation, and would like to understand why this is being done. And also, I would like to understand what consultation was made with landlords regarding this provision, and also what jurisdiction is this removing of this amendment that has legislation that is like ours, not ones in which it doesn't exist at all. Has there been precedent for this? And has there been any review of any constitutional concerns about right to privacy and right to property and home life? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator John White. Vice President John White, you indicated.
Thank you,
want to
Madam
speak.
President.
You have the floor.
This certainly isn't an area of my expertise, so when I read this bill, there's just one area that concerns me greatly, and that is the deletion of subsection 4A. I really believe that if I just look at many Bermudian families, whose responsibilities are for parents to look after the safety of their young ones, for example, I believe it's appropriate and fair to allow that homeowner to use discrimination if they believe and are aware that there's a person with a serious criminal offense residing on their property. So, as it's worded, as the bill is worded, 4A is the one that really concerns me and that I'm very much opposed to. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Vice President John White. Senator Tannock. I'm sorry, Cunningham. Yeah, I knew. Senator Cunningham.
The colours are obviously confusing you today. Thank you, Madam President. I just want to reiterate that this debate is not about whether discrimination should be tolerated, right? It should not on the basis of race, not on the basis of gender, disability, whatever protected ground that for good reason has found its way into this act. But I do not believe, any of us would disagree with that, but I think it's how we get here. Is this bill as drafted achieving what I believe the government is setting out that they're wanting to do, or does it create new problems? And I think we've heard a few examples, but ultimately I have two concerns today, the first on timing and the second on principle. And then I think I will have a few questions. But we've ultimately heard in this chamber and in another place repeatedly that a modernised Landlord and Tenant Act is coming. We've heard it multiple times, and I don't doubt the government's sincerity when it's saying it's well underway. But in my mind, Madam President, well underway is not a date. And I do appreciate when we get some clarity from questions saying, an answer will be given by the end of Q3 or Q4. We'll see some national security. So, we can have some semblance of timelines. But ultimately, this bill asks us to remove protections that landlords potentially currently rely on. So Section 44A exposes the same landlords to two entirely new grounds of potential discrimination, or potential discrimination claim, should I say. One based on the basis of receipt of government funding, and then the discrimination by association. And I think this is a fundamental rebalancing of the relationship between a landlord and a tenant. And we are ultimately being asked to legislate this before we actually see any piece of legislation that actually governs that relationship that we'll see, hopefully, in this chamber in the near future, or since it's well underway. And it has been said that another month we delay, another person's turned away from housing, and I don't dismiss that. And that, but I think it cuts both ways. And I think, every month that a landlord carries, legal exposure without the corresponding protections, we're ultimately looking at, what are those landlords going to decide to do? We already see them withdrawing from the rental market, converting their units into short-term vacation units, or even leaving them empty. So I think, we don't have a shortage of empathy in this chamber, and we see it on a weekly basis, but we do have a shortage of rental housing in this country. And I don't believe that this bill that is meant to expand housing will actually do that. So I think my second concern is that while well-intentioned, I think this may dilute the very protections that the bill or the act in the first place claims to protect. So the Human Rights Act protects sex, it protects disability, religion, marital status. It protects things that over decades have become real struggles for people and deserving of what is our law's largest, strongest protection outside of the Constitution, because they're rooted in who a person is, rather than a transaction they've entered into or a choice that they've made. So we are being asked to add receipt of government funding and discrimination by association, which I will say has not yet been defined. The Primary Act doesn't define it, and we're told that at some point in the future we will have guidelines that have yet to be written. So I don't see how we can pass legislation that is quite elastic and doesn't have, that is very undefined still. I've got a few questions and then I have a proposal, but one of my questions is, will the government commit to a specific month? I don't think I'll take quarter, a month for tabling the Landlord and Tenant Act, so that we can see the obligations and protections given to landlords and obviously tenants assessed side by side. My second question is, how many owner-occupied landlords currently rely on the Section 44A exemption, and what proportion of them are seniors dependent on that rental income? And my third question is, can the minister offer this chamber a clear example of what would not constitute discrimination by association under the bill as drafted? I think ultimately, and I've heard different things from different colleagues on this side, which to me suggests that this cannot go forward. And my proposal, if we were to move into committee, is that we move to rise and report, so that we can go away, deliberate. And I have to say, I should have started by saying I thank the ministry for providing a consultation to a number of us. But I just feel that this is such an important act. It supersedes every other piece of legislation. And I just think we need to look at it wholly. So I think, given the concerns raised by us and the independent senators, I would propose that we rise and report if we go into the committee stage.
If they do.
But thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Cunningham. Yes, Senator Misha Fubler, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to take some time to contribute to my support to the bill that we have before us today. I think we've already covered what the bill does and does not do, even though there appears to be some contention on that. Also, I want to ensure that we are considering the correct framing of this decision. Some of my colleagues from across the aisle have raised concerns around these scenarios that affect landlords, but it's important to remember that being a landlord is a commercial decision. You are not obligated to become a landlord. We all agree that housing is a human right, and I think we also agree that once someone has paid their debt to society, we should treat them in fairness when they try to access that human right, right? And so this idea, the act doesn't tell anyone they must become a landlord, but it does say if you offer housing to the public, you have to offer it to the whole public. If you have concerns around conduct, that is not disbarred from you in your decision making. But you cannot prejudge someone simply because of that characteristic that they may have. And I'd like to point to Bull versus Hall in a 2013 UK Supreme Court ruling that was unanimous. Guest house owners who ran the business from their own home could not refuse a double room to a civil partnered couple. We do not normally allow people to behave in a way which the law prohibits because they disagree with the law. And so while I sympathize with those who have already entered into this commercial endeavor and now rely on the income, I would pose the argument that if they are so dependent on that income, they'll make it work. Right? Like, they still need to earn the rent if they need it. And we are in a housing crisis. It's not like it's only going to be one person applying to rent the place. If there's someone who is more suitable, there will be reasons to choose that, but you should not be able to post no financial aid recipients allowed in the posting. I think we seem
Madam
to be
President, point of information.
Okay, I'll continue. And so also the more contentious bit around criminal record, I think I've covered that already. The person has already paid their debt to society. There are carve-outs for specific cases, right? So it's not across the board. And this kind of appeal to pity or to the granny situation, not explicitly called out here, but another place that was referenced. I think we need to flip that framing as well, right? Of the 1,977 financial assistance recipients based on the 2024-25 average, 1,043 of them are pensioners and seniors. 728 of them are persons with disabilities.
Madam President, point of order.
Senator Tannock, what is your point of order?
I believe that Senator Fubler may be unintentionally misleading the public with his statement. In the UK, guest houses are registered commercial businesses. They are not private entities and rented out between private individuals. So it's apples and oranges. You can't use that case law as an example of renting to a private person or from a private person. They are registered commercial entities. Thank you.
Yeah, they live in the house. Madam President. I fail to see we're trying to nitpick on the apples and oranges differences. Bottom line, it is someone engaged in a commercial endeavor who is now trying to say, I don't think we should discriminate, but, which seems to be the refrain in this debate from those opposed. I want the public to really think about what that means. Everyone says we are not in support of discrimination, but. How's that work? And I think this, we touched on what's going on in Ontario. This is not radical, right? Like there are many jurisdictions that have carve-outs to say you cannot discriminate based on where the money's coming from, although I think that's settled. Everyone seems to be in support of that. And so, in closing, Madam President, the landlord wants to judge tenants as individuals, loses nothing under this act. References, credit, conduct, all of that is still on the table. The only thing taken off the table is the shortcut, the blanket no to a whole class of people. People receiving financial assistance and those with an existing criminal record who by definition have already paid their debt to society. Thank you, Madam President.
And thank you, Senator Misha Fowler.
Madam President, I think some other of my colleagues have questions, but I do want to just make, while I'm still waiting for my technical officers and more questions are being posed to me, I just want to acknowledge I am the GM Minister of Youth, Social Development and Seniors, and I am the GM Minister of Home Affairs. But the question posed from Senator Cunningham about when can I give a date for the report for the landlord? That's under Home Affairs, the wrong ministry right now, so I cannot give you an answer for that. I have my technical officers here for yeah, you can't determine that we rise and report. Yeah, no. So we'll continue with this bill because this bill, I'll give my answers in a little while, but this bill is one that is needed. Yes. And I am carrying this bill, so thank you, Madam President.
Senator Simmons, you're waiting for information.
No, I think some other,
Questions?
I had another question before I start giving my answers.
Senator David Rogers, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. In an effort to, in breath saving and everything, I believe Tawana, the senator and the other senator have spoken quite eloquently to the points of opposition. The only thing I would state is I'm very, not disturbed. It's concerning. The associated in any way is so broad. Hypothetically, you can think of a number of situations where associated in any way can lead to wish hunts for discrimination. Not saying that discrimination does not happen, but I can see how it can be gamed in certain ways. So I'm very reluctant with such a broad, sweeping statement in the bill. But I would like to add my support to Tawana and Victoria. Sorry. To the senators.
Senator Simmons. Oh, I beg your pardon. Madam AG, Minister of Justice. Wilkerson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I do want to add some comments certainly in support of this piece of legislation. And picking up from my colleague, Senator Fubler, we hear on the other side of the aisle a unanimous assertion that discrimination shouldn't be tolerated. And what I get is discrimination shouldn't be tolerated except when it relates to certain kinds of people. And I'm going to just address some of the comments in turn. In relation to Senator White, I believe he said he had broad support for measures that were anti-discriminatory, but he felt that, if I paraphrase it, this seemed to be absolute. And I'm not certain if Senator White missed the point in this particular piece of legislation as it relates to criminal record, because I get the understanding that There is support for everything else, but we have a problem with criminal record and the removal of 44A. So let's talk about a little bit about the why of things. We are not saying that there are situations where someone must, in every circumstance, rent accommodation to a person with a criminal record. The legislation proposed clearly says, except where there are valid reasons. So the concern that Senator White raised, if there is a valid reason, if you live in a home with 2 apartments and someone is released from incarceration and they had a history, whether it was 20 years ago or 10 years ago, of being a sex offender, that would be a valid reason for a person with small children to say, I'm not going to, or whatever, to say, I'm not going to rent my accommodation to that person. That's a valid reason. We understand that. We're not suggesting that this should be, which goes back to the point that Senator Tannock seems to continually be confused upon. We're not saying that criminal record is a fundamental a ground for protection. There is a carve-out. This is anomalous in this way. And we say, why in Bermuda when it's not in other places? I'll tell you why. Bermuda's 22 square miles wide. Long, wide, 22 square miles. You cannot go anywhere from here when you have a criminal record. This is not America. This is not like on release from incarceration. Someone can say, you know what? I'm just going to move to another state. I'll get in my car and I'll drive to Texas. That is not available for people who are coming out of our systems of incarceration. So you've got a limited space of where you can go. In this House, this very Senate, just a week ago, I think a week ago, there was broad support around the efforts and aims of Esther House. Why? Because it was understood that there is a demand for housing for people who have criminal records on release from incarceration. In order to take advantage of parole, for example, Madam President, someone must have housing, and they must have stable housing, right? It is a requirement. It is acknowledged that we have a housing crisis. That is why previously the home with 2 apartments was in that protected class. But we are upon a crisis now where we have to look further. And there's recognition that, again, if there are valid reasons for the discrimination or for the reason not to let, that would be permitted, right? So this is not an absolute. You know, Madam President, this conversation causes me to recall a time around 2003. I was looking for an apartment to rent. Then, you know, we didn't have Instagram, or not to the degree that it is now and things of that sort. But anyway, I saw the ad in the World Gazette, right? I called the number. The homeowner said, we're in the process of still doing some renovations. So we have some things to do. But it's not at a point, and I said, but I'd like to see it in any event. I drove to the location. It was in Devonshire Bay. I got to the door, I knocked. The homeowner looked, saw me, and said, sorry, the apartment is gone. This is a kind of situation, right, that we are trying to guard against. Now, I took it that person looked out their window. They saw that I was a black person. They could not tell what I looked like when I called, or nor by my name, right? I explained that I was an attorney, right? They're happy to say I was not the kind of tenant that they were looking for, but they didn't know me. They didn't even bother to ask me a question, Madam President, right? I turned around and I left that location. That has stayed with me, right? So I cannot be a part of a Senate that simply says, we're not for discrimination, but you know what? Those people over there could be discriminated against because we think that if they have a criminal record, that shouldn't be a basis for protection under our Human Rights Act. We've already said, Madam President, it is not a broad protection. It is a protection that is caveated, and in that way, it is anomalous. People say, why does Bermuda have to be different? There are some ways in which Bermuda leads from other jurisdictions, and mainly it's as a result of our size, because of the closeness of our community, because people know everyone's business. There hasn't been a lot of contention around the by association portion of this legislation, but that is what that is meant to deal with. So that when someone sees you coming and they already have the 411 on what you did and who you did it with, that those are not grounds for saying that you are not eligible to be considered as a tenant. I find this incredibly rich. So there was a question around what about the right to home life and the right to privacy. I thought about that when I went to that house in Devonshire Bay. What about my right to home life? What about my right to privacy? As my colleague has already said, landlords have an option, right, as to whether they're going to be landlords in this market. There are protections, right, when people have their family members living in their accommodation in their apartments. But if they are not family members and those apartments, when it's two apartments, are available to be let, we're simply saying that those should be available to be let fairly, right, by everyone who can, whether they're on financial assistance, whether they have a criminal record, except where there is a valid reason in the case of that criminal record not to do so, and that would be upheld. There was a suggestion on the other side that about where is the data? Madam President, that question, while it's a fair question, but the point is, does the other side believe that we go through the process of creating legislation to cure nothing? We don't get together and have our teams working and drafters drafting to come up with a cure when there isn't a problem. There is always a problem we are trying to address when we bring legislation to these chambers, Madam President. So the suggestion like that this might be an imagined problem is one that I don't accept and won't tolerate.
Point of order. The AG is misleading the House. No one from this side has said that.
Madam President, I'm not sure that that was a point of order, but in any event, that is the suggestion, Madam President, based on the tenor of the comments from across the aisle. So, Madam President, I will say housing is a current issue. There is a suggestion across the aisle from the Honorable Senator Cunningham that we should rise and report. Rising and report would bring nothing to this process because we've already seen, Madam President, and we've heard the wall, right? So rising and reporting works when you have something technical to work out. That's not the case. What I get is a sentiment, Madam President, and it is just that is not what the Progressive Labor Party stands for, Madam President. If I felt that there was something fixable, and in the meantime, people were not being left out of accommodation, then maybe we could take this away and come back next year. But housing is a crisis. The housing minister is talking to me every day about how we can make housing an emergency, right? People are living in cars. People are living in caves. This is an urgent matter, Madam President. It cannot wait. I challenge our colleagues on the other side to get on the right side of the empathy that they profess to have, right? And think differently about how they might vote today in favor of something that will help people. It won't harm anyone, because if there are legitimate reasons not to rent to a person who has a criminal record, that landlord can stand on that carve-out in the legislation which has been brought thoughtfully. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Madam AG, Minister of Justice. Senator Tannock?
Yes, thank
I
you.
believe Senator Tannock has already spoken, Madam President.
Yes, she has spoken already.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. So that means that I cannot speak.
That is right.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct at this stage. Senator Lindsey Simmons?
You.
It's to you to respond to any of the questions or.
Thank you, Madam
posture of it.
President. Madam President, you know, listening to the AG tell her story brought me back not too long ago with myself. I bought a house, renovating it, and you know, I look white, although I'm mixed. I went to look at a house, and when I went there, I was fine until the wife came and said, "Aren't you the minister?" So I said, "GM minister." And all of a sudden, the house that I was going to be able to rent was no longer available because of my political affiliation. And, you know, this is what this bill intends to do, protect people. It's a story about a gentleman. He's got to be in his 70s now. When he was 9 years old, Madam President, he got a ball out of somebody's yard and he broke a window. At 9 years old, he has a criminal record. So, I'm sorry? We're talking about back in the day.
Pressing your comments to me.
Yes, back in the day when, I'm just getting my opinion. This is my opinion. Where little black boys were targeted, young black men. And what this also does is people with, that were caught at 18 with a spliff that now got a criminal record. They could be lawyers now. They could be, you know, we have a known case of somebody that turned their life around while being incarcerated, right? Great story of Mr. Charles Richardson, right? But he could be targeted because he has a criminal record. Although he's changed his life and doing positively, doing positive in the community, he can be discriminated on something that happened years ago, and he decided to change his life. So I support this bill, and I'll give you some answers to your questions that I know everybody's waiting for. So the first question now is so many questions. I'm just gonna give you answers. So the first question is the removal of the section for 44A will not remove the right of the landlord, as they still have the right to choose their tenant they want. So this argument about this is crazy to me, because you still have the right, as long as you're not discriminating against somebody, as like I was discriminated on, the AG was discriminated on. However, what this amendment does is remove the caveat of protection, which does not exist in majority of the jurisdictions that was researched, that included jurisdictions. Bermuda's Human Rights Act 1981 is models such as Canada, other jurisdictions that did not have the equivalent to Section 44A, the United Kingdom, Turks and Caicos, and the Cayman Islands. Also, Madam President, the inclusion of the criminal record in Section 22A is anomalous and not a natural fit with the list of other protection traits and beliefs. Although this is agreed with, but paragraph 7 was added by the Human Rights Amendment Act 2000 and is not an absolute ground given the except where there is valid reasons. Again, I'm not going to want a sex offender living in my apartment because I have children. This is not, and I'm going to repeat this so everybody is clear, this is not a new policy, which some senators appear to be mistaken in their when they spoke, and that this bill is making possessing a criminal record a fundamental protection ground. This is not, Madam President. Also, Madam President, we've indicated that 2 public consultations were done. One was targeted and went to the organizations that were relevant, and the second one was open to the entire local population. Madam President, throughout the existence of this provision, the Commission has observed that members of our community experience discriminatory practices with housing in circumstances where the protection afforded by Section 4.1 of the HRA is disapplied due to the exemption, which appears within Section 4.4A of the HRA exemption. The reality of the knock-on effect of this exception is that members of our community are experiencing discrimination while occupying and seeking to rent properties that are publicly advertised as being available. This results in them being deprived of the respect, dignity, and fair treatment that Section 4.1 seeks to provide, and this occurs in circumstances where they are unable to enforce and realize their human rights. Madam President, I've reached out to my minister, the Honorable Tanae Farbert, about where I see ASSA, they're not accepting financial assistance, or they have a 5-bedroom house, but you can, if you have children, you can't rent the place because they don't want young children there. Madam President, this is foolish. So this is protecting all people that reside in Bermuda. The basis for much of these questions appear to be rooted in a view that there is an apparent right to discriminate against individuals based on protected grounds in circumstances such as renting, which is currently prohibited. Madam President, despite 4.1, if a landlord resides in a main unit and then rents a separate dwelling that is a 1-bedroom, for example, they should be able to refuse to rent because the person is black. Again, foolish, Madam President.
Point of order. I don't even understand. I don't think anybody said that. Nobody said if you have a 1-bedroom, you should be able to refuse to rent to somebody because they're black. I don't even know where that came from.
Madam President, and I'll explain why. That is what's happening in real time. People are being refused because of the color of their skin. I didn't say that anybody on the other side said that. I'm telling you real life situations that are happening in Bermuda, and people are being refused because of these situations, and it's unfair, Madam President. Madam President, I can give they gave the talking points. I'm giving my talking points as well as answering any questions. Madam President, it needs to be stressed that
Point of
removing.
order. We have not delivered talking points. We have delivered consideration. Thank you.
Senators,
No, you gave your own opinions as well.
Senator Lindsay Simmons is responding to the questions, and some of as she has explained, some of her comments are comments and not necessarily in response to the questions that you have. And I am asking for the senators to allow Junior Minister Lindsay Simmons to respond. And before I go on, I would just like to acknowledge the presence of the Minister, Minister Tanae Farbert, Minister of Youth, Social Development and Seniors. Welcome to you, ma'am. And I am requesting that Senator Simmons be allowed to respond to the questions, and she may well have comments as well as answering the questions.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, it needs to be stressed that removing the caveat does not remove the right of the landlord to choose a tenant. Currently, with the carve-out, it has been reported and observed that prospective landlords have been able to refuse to rent to prospective tenants because they are Bermudian, because they are living with a partner that they are not married to. Because this received because they receive financial assistance and because they have a child, none of these landlords were required to rent to any of these individuals, but they were not able to exclude them from the arbitrary and again to state that that somebody's black. We can also highlight 44C, which is relevant to scenarios where you are sharing rooms in a single dwelling versus completely separate dwellings where people were living independently. Madam President, discrimination based on association can occur when a person who is white experienced discrimination. Let's say they were refused a service because they attended a restaurant with a person who is black. This scenario was provided during the consultation. Another individual indicated that they were treated wrong within an organization because of their political opinions, of their best friend whom they are associated with. Sexual orientation was another piece of identified within the consultation. Someone reported being subject to adverse treatment when accessing their services because of their close association with their friend who is homosexual. These examples were shared as part of the second consultation conducted. So these are real life experiences that people are experiencing, Madam President. Discrimination by association occurs when someone is treated unfairly because of their own protection characteristic, but because of their connection to another person who has one. Madam President, guidelines are being produced by the HRC to give guidance on criminal record because it is recognized. For example, some landlords may have vulnerable persons, for example, grandchildren or seniors visiting or residing with the landlord, and the landlord would not be deemed discriminatory based on such offenses. Madam President, associative discrimination extends that protection to a second person who gets caught in the same discriminatory treatment because of who they are connected to. It could be a spouse, child. This would overlap with a protection ground, but also a friend, roommate, or co-worker. Madam President, the housing impact. There is presently a detrimental impact which is further compromised by 44A. We previously referred to this. The right to housing has been codified by a wide range of international legal instruments under the umbrella of the United Nations, such as the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights and the International Convent on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. The Office of the UN High Commission for Human Rights reported that more than 1.8 billion people worldwide lack adequate housing, and discrimination in housing is one of the most pervasive and persistent barriers to the fulfillment of the right of adequate housing. The exception set out within Section 44A of the HRA is frustrating the right to adequate housing at a time where members of our community are experiencing difficulties securing housing, periods of being unhoused, or periods of being inadequately housed. Madam President, an example that has been reported throughout the consultation, it overlapped in some situations with the persons being Bermudian as well. The problem here was that these individuals were unprotected by 4.1. Thank you, Madam President. I believe I answered all the questions.
Senator Tanner, you have the floor.
Yes, Madam President, I do have a supplemental to Senator Simmons. So my question was, what legislation or what provisions were looked at that were akin to ours to support this this removal of 4A? And I just heard Senator Simmons reiterate Turks and Caicos and Cayman, which I distinguished earlier because they don't have a Human Rights Act. And then I also just now heard Senator Simmons say the UK Equality Act doesn't provide for something like Section 4A. So my question to Senator Simmons is, the UK Equality Act says, under Schedule 5, private individual landlords can refuse to rent based on religion, belief, sexual orientation, provided they do so privately without using an estate agent or publishing an advertisement. It also has a small premises exception. A landlord is exempt from the duty to make physical, reasonable adjustments to a property if the property qualifies as a small premise. So my question to Senator Simmons is, what aspect or which UK Equality Act was she looking at when she was telling the Senate that there was no equivalent to R4A? Thank you.
Yeah. Senator Simmons, are you expecting more
Yes,
answers to the questions?
Yes, Madam President.
And Senators, may I broach a question to you all? It's now almost 20 to 1. Would you like to have lunch at this stage, and then we will resume and have the questions. I don't know, Senator Simmons, whether you have sufficient answers for the questions.
Madam President, with your indulgence, I would like to, I'm getting the answers from the technical officers as we speak, but I would like to finish my bill because they're
That's
not going
fine.
to be able to come back after the break.
We will carry on to, and you'll finish your bill then.
Point of clarification.
Yes, Senator Cunningham?
It was quite difficult to follow the junior minister's responses since she was just reading out answers versus actually addressing the question and then the answers. So I'm not 100% convinced that my questions were answered, particularly the how many owner-occupied landlords currently rely on the Section 44A exception, and what proportion of them are seniors, dependent on their rental income, and then the clear example of what would not constitute discrimination by association. I know we heard a number of examples that I would assume constitute discrimination by association, but I wanted an example of what would not. Thank you.
Oh. Sorry. Senator Tariq Dunbar-Smith, you...
Yes, thank you, Madam President.
Question.
Again, standing on what Senator Cunningham said, I didn't hear an answer on what protections are there for the landlord. In my third question, I asked, and someone can just say that they discriminate against me, and that question, I didn't hear an answer for that question in Senator Simmons's reply.
What protections are there for the landlord?
Sorry. I said it was what safeguards exist for the homeowner who rejects a tenant for legitimate and non-discriminatory reasons that ensure that, when someone can just say, well, you didn't rent to me because I was black, right? And what defense does a landlord have against that? And it could be another reason. Anyone can say anything as why somebody didn't rent to him.
Yeah.
Sorry, I beg your pardon, Madam AG, did you want to address? Yes, certainly, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Yes, I did want to attempt to address a couple of the questions. I think Senator Tariq Dunbar-Smith's question relates to what protections there are. The same protections that currently exist under the Human Rights Act. This isn't creating any new category of protections of the process that currently exists. If someone makes a claim to the Human Rights Commission, there's a tribunal. People also have the benefit of the judicial process, but there are no changes to the process based on these additional protections just for association, people on financial assistance, and criminal records. So no change. Senator Cunningham asked the question, what doesn't constitute discrimination? I think it's a very odd question. Treating people fairly is what doesn't constitute discrimination. So an example would be, I think I made the case already, if I have 2 apartments in my home and someone comes to rent those 2 apartments, and a person may happen to be on financial assistance, but I also have reference letters from their prior landlord saying that they're just terrible tenants. They haven't done well. I would be permitted to act on my right and not rent to that person because I have legitimate reasons to do so, not discriminatory ones.
Point
That-
of clarification. Sorry, my question was specifically to what would not constitute discrimination by association. By association rather than any of the protected classes.
The-
You're just saying associating with someone who's on financial assistance?
or anything. I don't understand the question that you're asking to be answered in the negative. What doesn't constitute discrimination? It doesn't constitute discrimination when you treat people fairly.
And Madam President, an example of that is, for instance, I go canvassing with you, Senator Cunningham, and then it's a picture of us up, and then I go to rent a place, and somebody doesn't want to rent to me because I'm associated with you. You know, that's how you could be discriminated against.
No, her question was, what's not discrimination? By association.
Senator Simmons.
What is?
Senator Simmons, have you received the information in answer to the questions that have been posed?
Yes, Madam President, we looked across multiple provinces in Canada to see who else has provisions identical to 44A and did not see any equivalent. Madam President, if someone is rejected from renting a place for non-discriminatory reasons, this would not be a violation of the Act. And Madam President, I read in my brief, and I could read it again. The amendments, Madam President, are grounded in the HRC's constitution process, a stakeholder consultation, the 4th of November to the 31st of December 2022. 37 stakeholders invited, 6 provided feedback, and an island-wide public consultation on the 23rd of March to the 14th of April 2023. 44 anonymous public responses. These surface concentrated discrimination with no resource under the current HRA, including landlords refusing tenants who receive financial assistance, rental advertisements labeled no financial assistance, and complaints to the HRC where Section 44A stripped the complainant of any remedy under Section 41.
Senator Tannock.
Yes, thank you, Senator Simmons. As I mentioned in my opening question, my follow-up question was, what was the support? And I believe Senator Simmons just mentioned that they looked across the jurisdictions of Canada and did not find something similar. As I mentioned in my opening question, I will repeat it. In the Ontario Charter of Rights, which is what ours is based on, there is an exemption for shared accommodation. So can the Senator and Junior Minister please share how that is not relevant and how that is not equivalent to 4A? Because we are being told that this exception doesn't exist other places, and we are being quoted legislation in which it clearly does exist as saying it is not applicable.
Minister. Madam AG, Minister of Justice, Wilkerson.
Thank you, Madam President. I find it interesting that there is always a call for what other places have a similar piece of jurisdiction. I was attempting in my earlier comments to outline the fact that Bermuda is truly unique, right? The situation where people do family homes, you build a house and then you add on an apartment for your oldest child, and then one's coming back from university, and then you add on another, right? Those are unique Bermudian things because of the size of the
island.
Because of the size of the island, right? And that's the reason that there was originally the exemption for that type of accommodation originally. But as I've said, the crisis has made us look at it differently now.
Thank you, Madam AG.
Madam,
Senator Simmons.
thank you, Madam
You're good.
President. The research. The HRC undertook a jurisdictional review of human rights legislation throughout the provinces and territories in Canada, New Zealand, the Human Rights Act 1993, the United Kingdom Equality Act 2010, the Human Rights Act 1998, the Cayman Island, Cayman Island Constitution Order 2009, the Turks and Caicos Island Constitution Order 2011 to assess where sources of income was protected. And then, it gives the table of the places that we actually researched. So, Madam President, we did research other jurisdictions. This is different from shared accommodations. No sharing of bathroom or kitchen in an independent unit. So I believe I answered all the questions, Madam President.
Then you can proceed to move your bill.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I move that the bill entitled the Human Rights Amendment Act 2026 be now read a second time.
Is there any objection to that motion? No objection.
Madam President, I move that that Rule 26 be suspended in respect of this bill.
Two objections.
No, she can't be asked. It was two. That's it. You already ruled. Madam President, I move that the bill entitled the Human Rights Amendment Act be now
Senator
read.
Simmons, there've been two objections, and we'll have to take a division on it.
Any two that raise their hand.
For second, for anything other than third reading, it's got to be two.
So we'll have to take a division. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
And they objected to it.
Motion. There has been a motion to suspend Standing Order 26. If you are in agreement with suspending, say aye. If you are against, say nay. Senator Cunningham.
Nay.
Senator Rogers.
Nay.
Senator Smith.
Nay.
Senator Bell.
Aye.
Senator Fubler.
Aye.
Minister Parent-Chief.
Aye.
Senator Simmons.
Aye.
Minister Wilkerson.
Aye.
Senator Tannock.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. For clarity, this will send us into committee.
Correct.
You can't.
Nay.
Senator White.
Nay.
Madam President.
Nay.
With a motion of 5 ayes to 6 nays, the motion is defeated. So we'll have to go into committee. And at this point, move on.
Senators, at this point, it's now 10 to 1. We will have lunch. We'll break for lunch, and we will return at 2:15. So, Senators, the Senate stands adjourned until 2:15. Thank you.
Thank you.